habits were developed, I think, in COVID, and kids are just having a hard time coming back to school on a regular basis. So,
And I feel like this is just kind of more of a general question or kind of protocol thing. Was by adopting new textbooks last meeting. And I was curious if there was a way for board members or people to look at textbooks or curriculum that we're actually adopting. So I was just kind of curious about that process.
yeah, that's a great question too. That's certainly a hot topic lately in the news and the media. If you see articles and things like that. So, prior to bringing, well, first and foremost, any textbooks that we adopt do have to come to the board for approval. Prior to doing that, we go through an extensive process that usually is a year-long process where teachers at the beginning of the year preview all the different, 10, 12 different options and land on 2 of them that they'd like to pilot for the year. And then as soon as we land on the 2 options that we're going to pilot, teachers, go about testing them out in their classroom. We also have to send out a notice to all of our families saying they're available for public viewing at the district office or online at these links. And, there's a link, you can click it, you can see the whole book, the curriculum. And then we also have a Google form that we ask for people to use to provide that feedback. So that would be a great time for the board to, I'd love to have you involved then prior to when we bring them to you for approval and saying, oh, no, we're sorry, we don't, we'd love to have you involved early on in that process. So I'll make it a point, next year. I don't have off the top of my head what we're looking at piloting, but we'll make sure you're all aware of that opportunity when it comes out.
Okay, yeah, I'm definitely interested in that. And then also, I was looking through some of the data, and it shows kind of I think it started with 5th grade when they start asking students about their feelings at school safety, things like that. And I've noticed that as the grades go up, 5th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade, 11th grade, the numbers actually start going down. So it looks like less than half of students in junior high and high school don't feel safe at school for one reason or another. So I was just curious, do we have a partnership, or has there ever been discussion of a partnership with perhaps ACSO to have school resource officers on at least junior high and high school campuses, ideally all campuses, but starting maybe with those secondary campuses? Or what other safety kind of upgrades have we started implementing?
Yeah, another great question. And school safety was actually the top vote getter from our feedback from our educational partners. So first, before I go into answering that, is when I said how rewarding it was to enter the data for goal 1, it was equally as depressing to enter the data for goal 2. That's really tough to see how many students, don't feel safe at school, they don't feel connected. And I did comment on that in the analysis, just feeling like we're seeing the effects of the pandemic evidenced in that data, right? It's tough. A lot of people haven't recovered from that. So yes, we started meeting with all law enforcement agencies in Amador County before the school year even started, the sheriff's office and all the city PDs, specific to just school safety efforts. And that was, of course, on the heels of the Uvalde that had just happened, a few months prior. And so we talked about school resource officers. There was some discussion of, collaborative funding of that, and we weren't successful in bringing it to fruition this year. However, we've all talked about once we have a consolidated high school and a consolidated junior high, having a resource officer full-time on both of those campuses. Obviously, that will depend on funding and whatnot, but we hope to, continue those conversations and make that happen. We've also had the sheriffs came out and, actually, sheriffs walked all of the school campuses that are in their jurisdiction to look for safety issues, and the city PDs walked every school campus in their jurisdictions and gave recommendations. And so we have a list, and we're kind of working on tackling those things one at a time. And then you did see some actions added in the LCAP specific. You'll see Raptor Technologies a little later tonight. So certainly school safety is our top priority, and we've taken a lot of steps this year to hopefully address that and help.
Okay, cool.
ALICE trainings. We just had another ALICE training last Friday. Had 29 people at the district office for that. So much effort and attention is being given to this.
And don't forget the $1.2 million we spent on security cameras this year as well.
Yes, yeah. Okay. No, that's all great, and I'm definitely interested in seeing how some of the other, departments and powers that be in the county and whatnot can partner with us to really help with that safety thing. I think that's super important to me, and I think most people. And then the last one I was going to ask about is that I noticed on here the parents' perceived level of participation in schools, in school decisions, seems low at 18%. And I have mixed feelings about this. But I guess what are some strategies or a course of action that maybe has been discussed that could maybe bolster some of those sense of participation in their children's education, other than them actually doing it? But yeah.
Yeah, so it is something, and it's head scratching because on the one hand you feel like, my goodness, we've communicated, we've invited people to come out, but they're not coming out. So we've talked about things such as going to them instead of having them come to us. We've gone to staggering meeting times and offering babysitting for some things. We have also for our DLAC meetings, we actually personally call, we have 6 bilingual aides, so they actually call their group of families and make sure they're aware and invite them to it. So trying to be more personal our invitations instead of just Parent Square. Those are just some of the ideas we have now, but it's certainly an area that we're going to need to put our heads together and try to figure out how to get more people involved in our schools and in their kids' education.
Yeah, and I appreciate all of that kind of stuff, but I think when I saw this, it shocked me, but it also didn't shock me. And just coming from a teacher's perspective and teaching even at an elementary level where most parental involvement, I think, and I'm not saying all parental involvement, but there seems to be more parental involvement at the younger your kids are. And just knowing, teaching in this district at younger grade levels and knowing that the willingness of a lot of parents to actively participate in children's education is pretty low. It's usually the same few people that are doing the same thing, and I think that rate probably stays pretty relative as they progress through grade levels. So I guess in my personal opinion, I'm taking some of that information with a grain of salt, just knowing that there's a lot of people that say that they don't have a say in anything that's going on with their education. However, sometimes I think the most things that ever happen is maybe complaining on social media or doing something like that. So I think that parents stepping up and being an active participant in their children's educational success is also a really large contributing factor to some of this as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I should note, and I don't know, you can't really put an asterisk here, but I think then we had about 100 people respond out of, we have 4,000 students, and there were like 100 responses.
Right.
So it's important to mention that too. So, and you make some very good points. We are begging, I know every school begging parents to participate in school psych council and PTA and all of those things. But we also know people are busy and it's hard, right? It's really
100%.
tough.
I
Yeah.
get that. I've got 3 small kids, but yes.
Yes. So thank you.
Okay. Mr. Marzano, did you have any follow-up questions?
No, not at this time.
Mr. Whitaker?
Not at this time.
So I'm really glad actually that Kayla asked about the survey, because one of my concerns, and I'm just going to keep bringing it up, is that out of 4,000 students, do we know how many households are participating in ARIES or Parent Square? And based on that number, out of the 100 surveys, obviously that's also a much smaller segment of the number of people who are actually just, have an account online. And I know that we are moving to that communication pipeline more and more. And I'm concerned that parents are just not going to adopt the software. And so don't we have a responsibility to inform them in the way that they're able to receive and consume the messages, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to note there's a difference, because there is the app, the Parent Square app, and there's certain things that only go to people who have the app. But when we send things like this out, we do what's called a smart alert. So that is where you get a text message, an email, and it goes to your app if you have the app. So that's how we ensure that every single family gets the message. But I still think your point is very well taken. And I know Haley down here just finished with a communication survey too, and has some really good data on that, and probably some ways that we will help hopefully better engage our families and communicate with them. So.
And then following up on that, I wonder if we get more responses from parents of students of a certain age, because I would not be surprised to see this kind of response from our high school parents, because there's a definite pullback as our kids get older from the school wanting parents on campus, and obviously it just, the culture is different. They want the kids to do it, right?
Right.
And that's very clear. But for a parent who's, like Kayla mentioned, used to being on campus on a regular basis, that can be a little bit surprising or off-putting. So I kind of wonder if we need to have a little bit more information about the sources of some of the survey results when we report them in something like this, because this can look like a really downer number. But with a little bit more information, it might be exactly like in the realm of expectation.
Yeah, I think it's such a great point. If you gave this to a kindergarten class, I don't think these numbers would be like this, right? All the parents in kindergarten. We also talked about the timing when this goes out. It typically goes out from the schools in like May, when it's just crazy time, right? And I know that's a challenging time to sit down and take the time to fill it out. So maybe putting it out earlier in the year, just a lot of things that we could do different. But yes, good point.
Do
So
you?
we have, just on communication, if I can say, we have 4,946 contacts in Parent Square. So that's staff and adults that would get messages. Again, that's more than the students we have, but students have more than one parent, and some have step parents and things like that. But our practice has been, with 99% of posts that go on Parent Square, there's a smart alert that Sean referred to, and that is directly tied to the student information we have in Aries and the email address and phone numbers that we have on file. So text messages and emails still can be sent to parents through Parent Square. So
Even if they don't have the app.
even if they don't have the app, they're going to get the message via text and email. Now, as a parent of 4, what I like about Parent Square is all of those messages are in one place instead of buried in text messages and inboxes in my email. I can just look them up on Parent Square, and I know a lot of parents are adopting it. And one of the goals with Parent Square was to have a uniform system K-12, so that more and more parents see how much easier it is to be connected with communications when all schools are using the same platform.
So my last question about the survey responses is, do you look at those by school site, and then does that tell you anything material about the culture of each school site?
We do, and each school site gets their own report back. So they get their California Healthy Kids Survey report, so they see how their 5th graders did, or high school 9th and 11th. They get their parent, and there's also a staff survey too that's part of this, so they can see exactly what their people are saying.
Is that on our website anywhere by school site?
I don't know. I don't believe it is. Is it over by school, the reports, the breakdown? But maybe it's something, or each school could have it on their website, the breakdown of what parents are saying. Yeah, because, you want to make your data public, whether you like your data or not. If it should be public and people should be able to see it. So that's a valid point.
I would just be concerned, or I would be interested to see if it was consistent from site to site.
Mm-hmm.
So, the only statistic I saw that I was going to comment on was the college-going rate. In spite of COVID, was either pretty steady or increasing markedly for each of the years, which I found to be interesting.
Thank you for pointing that out, because, again, you try to find a balance between going too far into the weeds and going through every piece of data and not, but there's something that I like to point out a difference in. If you look at goal 1, one of the metrics is successfully completing A through G requirements, our students, and that went down. We only have 22.7% right now that are completing A through G, but then you look at the college going rate and it's almost 60%. And so what that would tell you is a lot of our kids are going on to 2-year programs, not necessarily, UC or CSU, but they're going on to post-secondary education. So I think the college going rate is as important or more important than the A through G rate. Now, we certainly want to see more students completing A through G requirements, but I think the college going rate is a really bright spot too.
So do you observe that there's a particular A through G requirement that tends to hang up more students than others?
Typically, the math and the foreign language. Those are typically the two. Was that what you were going to say, Mr. Critchfield?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, 3 years of math, in the
But we are now requiring 3 years of math, right?
we
For
are.
all of
So
our high school graduates.
everyone will have that, whether they have the grade to have it count toward their A through G or not. We'll see. But yes, we do have 3 years of math and 3 years of science. So
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Did anybody have any follow-up questions?
I have a follow-up comment in the sense that on the college going rate, real good to look at the students with disabilities, up to 48%. And the target for next year is 30%. So, we've well exceeded it, and it's been constantly growing over the years.
yeah, thank you. I want to point out one other piece of data. Here we go. I know you're getting me going, but this came up last year on our CTE pathway completion rate. And I remember this conversation in the board meeting where I presented the LCAP last year, because if you look at, that's in the goal 1 metrics on page 18. Last year there were 0 students with disabilities who were pathway completers, and this year there were 22 students with disabilities who completed a pathway. For 26.5% overall, we had a total of 83 students who were pathway completers, and of those 83, 22 of them were students with disabilities. So that, just hearing you say students with disabilities made me want to highlight that as well. Some real nice successes and bright spots.
I have a question. On the, where we have no's on the contributed to increased or improved services, how does the district convey to the families and, basically the community how those are being addressed? Is it like a report, or I know there's so much information in this. I'm just wondering how does that get conveyed on how the district is going to address those?
Well, the yes or no really just refers specifically to the $3.9 million that those students generate for us, the English learners, foster youth, and low income. And if it says a yes there, that says we're using that money specifically to benefit those 3 student groups. And if it says a no, it can still benefit those 3 student groups. It's just not principally directed. Like if you look at some of our intervention teachers, for example, are funded with Title I, which you can't check yes with Title I money, but obviously they're still benefiting those 3 student groups. So just because it says no doesn't mean, I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but no just means we're not using those $3.9 million of dollars, but it's part of this LCAP because it helps paint the overall picture of how we're meeting the needs of all kids and how we're meeting the 10 state priorities. So I don't know if that helps at all.
I guess I'm wondering how, say there's a family at home and they're reading this and they see no and they're thinking, how come, why aren't our students getting these services, or they'll perceive it that way. So how does that get communicated where they can be informed that no, it's not quite, there's a certain way to read this.
Right, they get the service just because it says no doesn't, like, for example, Where Everyone Belongs, the web and Link Crew, those welcoming programs. Everyone gets those, but it's not a contributing action. So yeah, there's not anything that specifically says just because it's marked no there doesn't mean those 3 student groups don't get it. It just means we're not using those specific funds to pay for it. So that's
John,
really what it's
who
about.
creates this template? Because this is obviously a template.
It is. Well, the California Department of Education. Ours is through
Has ours always been over 100 pages, or I feel like it hasn't.
there
Like
is
it
not.
started out like 30 or 40 initially, and then
Yeah, through the years it has grown as more legislation passes, and as it's for a good reason. The interest groups have come out and wanted more transparency and more detail, but it's because those are the students that are generating the funds, English learners, foster youth, and low income. So they really want as much specificity as possible and as much detail as possible. So that has added pages and added sections and added prompts that we have to write to. But it hasn't always been this long. It's, 96 pages without the instructions. It's a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
So I had to print it to actually look at it because I find myself going from one page and then comparing it to the second table that goes with it with, the changes and I need the first table to see what the actual thing was because
Yes.
it'll say 1.32, but I don't remember what 1.32 is.
I do the same thing, Julie, as I'm like, you should see
This
my
is
desk. I
hideous.
have to handwrite it on each one of them. I actually handwrite it instead of compare because I'm looking at it so much. So yeah, I do the
I mean,
same
this
thing.
would be much better in just a big spreadsheet than in a report. And any place where I see that you have written paragraphs and paragraphs of full sentences makes my eyes cross.
Mine
That
too.
is my main criticism, is that none of this should be narrative.
Thank you.
It can't be consumed this way. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's a lot, but
it's too tedious, and it almost makes me think that that's the point, that that's the purpose, is to make it tedious.
and part of it too. So we submit ours to the California Department of Education for approval because we're a single district county. CDE approves ours, and every year I send it to them, and they're like, "We'd like you to be a little more detailed in this response, or in this response, or in this response." So I'll get it back for a few little clarifications, or so that lengthens it a little bit too sometimes.
Can I say something? So Sean is being very savvy with how he's responding to this, but this is a very compliance-heavy document that he does a lot with his department to make it actually mean something when it turns into our students. So yes, the template has many flaws, and the way it has to be presented, Sean's very constrained with what he has to do, but this is not how the LCAP really takes action in our district. And so that, I just want to make sure we make that distinction because I do agree with Julia on that. This is, like many templates, they can be very tough to follow. But that's why Ed Services does so much good because they take that and they actually turn it into services that benefit kids where it may be hard to fully decipher that when you're looking at that document.
And to clarify, when you have mentioned that we have trouble getting parents to participate in school site council, school site council actually determines how a small piece of this is utilized on the school site, correct?
Correct. So one of our action items in here is site allocations. 150,000 goes out to each school based on a formula of the number of students and the percentage of these unduplicated students. And then site council has to do kind of the same process where what is our data? What should we focus on? How should we use these funds to benefit the students? So yes, that's a very good point.
Do you think that the increase in students going to college is at all related to our implementation of AVID? Or is it too soon for that to be correlated?
I think it's a number of things. I don't think it's just AVID. I think maybe even dual enrollment and kids seeing they can do college classes while still in high school. And I think there's a number of different factors. AVID certainly is one of them, though. That anyone can go to college if you want to, right? And maybe community colleges being free if you take 12 units. Like I think there's a lot of factors that are contributing to it. But whatever it is, we're really pleased to see that number, and it's increasing each year. So.
All right, so we don't have to take action on this, correct? It's
Not
just a
tonight. I
reading?
think you declare a successful first reading. So.
And we don't need to vote on it being a successful first reading? Okay. Well, I will go ahead and declare a successful first reading. And we will continue to another public hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Okay, so I'm going to declare this hearing open. I'm going to read the blurb, and then if anybody wants to comment, I will. In accordance with California Education Code Section 42127, the governing board shall hold a public hearing on the budget to be adopted for the subsequent fiscal year. The budget to be adopted shall be prepared in accordance with California Education Code Section 42126 and shall be approved on or before July 1 of each year. Does anybody have any comments or questions during the public hearing? We have none, so I'm going to close the public hearing. And we're going to 12.4, the annual budget presentation. Mr. Critchfield.
Yes, speaking of compliance-heavy documents, I hope you took the time to read through all 15 attachments that I put with our budget. If you did not, I will take some time to summarize that for you tonight. Just to kind of go back to what Sean was explaining earlier, this is a time of year when he and I are very linked at the hip with our two most important agenda items of June, the LCAP and the budget. So the way these ed codes are written is we are both required to hold public hearings, and a public hearing on the LCAP and a public hearing on the budget. Those are supposed to be done at the same board meeting. However, we are also required by June 30th that the board approve the LCAP and the budget. Those approvals cannot happen in the same meeting where the public hearings occurred. So that's why we have to bring these items to you twice. So next week, we have our second board meeting in June. We will not have the public hearings because those happened, but you will see these same, essentially the exact same agenda items, the LCAP and the budget, but in a week, those will be action items that the board will need to vote on versus tonight where this is a discussion item, okay? So I'll get into some of the details of our budget, but I just more want to focus tonight on just where we sit when it comes to the state budget and how it relates to how we build our budget here as a district. And so the first attachment in your board packet, it's labeled May Revised 2023 Update. That's mostly what I'll be referring to. The other attachments are the forms according to SACS, which is the State Accounting Code structure. And so those represent, I don't even know how many hours of work. Many hours. Last week, our budget team of myself, Fiscal Director Robert Norton, and our two fiscal analysts, Lydia Cooper and Terry McCrory, were in the office past business hours, I'll say, numerous nights. And so I want to first thank them for all the work that they did to make this happen. I'm the one here presenting, but they do a lot of the heavy lifting to make this happen. And so this summarizes all of the anticipated revenues and expenditures for the upcoming fiscal year, okay? So in that attachment, with the presentation from school services, I just want to highlight a few things. So if you're able to open that first attachment, the May Revise 2023 update, I will be referencing some of those slides as we talk. So on the second page, slide number 2 just does a good job of summarizing the volatility of the state budget. And so to review kind of the process of what happens, back in January, the governor puts forth his proposal for the upcoming budget, which is still 6 months away from receiving approval. And then there's a lot of political jockeying and maneuvering that goes on over the next few months. And then the governor puts out a May revision. The governor also has more information by the time we get to May that he didn't have in January based on state revenues and taxes and everything that's going on to then be able to put forth a May revision. However, this is not final. The budget does not have to be enacted until the first week of July. However, we are required to have a budget that's approved by this board and sent to the state prior to June 30th. So everything that we put in our budget is based off of the May revision, and it can and most likely will change. And so we use the best information we have to this point. If the enacted budget is significantly different than the May revision, then we have the opportunity to do a 45-day revision, which is actually what we did this fiscal year that's winding down. If you remember back in August, I brought to the board a 45-day revision of the budget because the May revision was so different from the enacted budget that actually happened in July. And then, of course, throughout the year, we have 2 other checkpoints where we have opportunities to revise and refine the budget, with our first interim that occurs in December and the second interim that occurs in March. And the further along we get in the fiscal year, obviously the more accurate we can be because we know more information. So anyway, so that's where we're at. There's a lot of volatility in this budget. State taxes have not come in at the anticipated rate, so revenues are down, and there are some pitfalls in this budget. So if you go to slide number 8 in the presentation, which is on the I don't think there are page numbers. So just slide number 8. There's 2 slides on every page. This is the LCFF overview. This kind of shows you some of the highlights of what's going on. So there's a proposed 8.22% statutory COLA. That means that the majority of programs and our largest funding source, the local control funding formula, will receive an 8.22% increase. However, this does come at a cost. The governor will be reducing some of the one-time funds that in this proposal, if it goes through, will reduce some of the one-time funds. And I'll talk about those in more detail as we get a little further along in the presentation. Slide 11 gives you a good idea of exactly how we are funded for our largest funding source. So again, I've heard many people say you only care about attendance because it's how you get your money. Now, that could be true for me as the CBO. Now, I was a principal and a teacher, so I do care about kids being at school for their education. But it is 100% true that the more kids come to school, and the more often they come to school, and the more students we have, the more money we receive as a district. We do that so we can pay our employees and have these programs and have an LCAP and do all these things that cost money. Educating children is not cheap. And so it is important that kids attend school. And so these are the funding factors that turn into these larger numbers that turn into millions of dollars for how we're funded as a district. And so you'll see a new grade span here with TK funding being a little different. And so they have adjusted TK funding to acknowledge the fact that educating transitional kindergarten students is quite costly. And so you'll see that add-on of an extra $3,044 per, and you'll hear me say ADA, that's average daily attendance. So that's not per student, that's per ADA. And there's a difference because remember, we don't get funded on enrollment, we get funded on how often all of our kids attend school. So if we have 100 students and they attend school 92% of the time on average, we actually only receive funding for 92 students, even though we still educate 100 students, okay? And if you've heard me present before, there's many editorial comments I could make on that, but I will reserve those tonight. And so TK is that new grade span with the Universal Transitional Kindergarten Program rolling out over the next couple years, the acknowledgement that it does cost more to educate TK students. And then you'll see the next 4 grade spans, kindergarten through 3rd grade, 4th through 6th, 7th and 8th, and 9th through 12th, each have their own dollar allotment. If you go to the 3rd line from the bottom, that's essentially what we get per ADA for each one of those grade spans. The line just below it, 20% supplemental grant, that is how the LCAP number is produced. So if a student is unduplicated, in other words, if they're either low socioeconomic status, they're foster youth, they're an English learner, they're homeless, then those students, we get an extra 20% funding on that student group. You total that all up, and that's what turns into the $4 million LCAP for Sean, which is required with the plan and everything else that goes with that, okay? So anyway, so this kind of does a good job of summarizing the dollar amounts on how we fund all of our students.
I have a question.
Sure.
Down below all those lines, it says maximum amount per ADA to arrive at the LEA's grant amount, multiply adjusted base rate per ADA by 20% and UPP. What is UPP?
Unduplicated pupil percentage.
Okay.
So again, what would happen is, I'll go back to 100 students. If we had 100, we don't, we have over 4,000, right? But if we had 100, and right now I think our UPP is like 45%. So 45 of those kids would be considered unduplicated pupils. I've never liked this name, but the reason it exists is if a student is a foster youth and low socioeconomic status, you can't count them twice. So that's where the unduplicated comes from. They're still statistically significant for both, but you don't get to count that as if it were 2 kids. They count as 1. So 45 students qualify in at least 1 or more of those categories. That means we get an extra 20% funding on those 45 kids. So we don't get 20% extra on 100% of our kids, just on those that are unduplicated pupils. Does that make sense? Now, if you exceed 65%, we're at 45%. If you exceed 65%, every kid above that you get an extra 55% funding. So there are districts that have unduplicated pupil percentages of 85%. So they're going to get an extra 55% on 20% of their kids. They'll get the 20% on the first 65%, and then anybody above that, they'll get another 55%. And that's where you see in some of these districts some really large LCAPs because, again, that money all goes to your LCAP as well. Did that answer your question, James? Okay. All right, so moving along, if you scroll down to slide 15, this is what school services refers to as the dartboard. This is just a good reference page. I'm not going to talk about the detail, but they show what happened in the current year and what's projected to happen next year and then the 3 subsequent years. Again, at this point in time, these are estimates. There is no way these things are set in stone. We have seen things change pretty wildly from May revision just to July. So to have numbers for 2026-27, it's definitely just a projection, but it gives you an idea of at this point in time where they see the economy going and how education will be funded. Moving down to slide 19, this is where I'm the bearer of bad news on a few things. So I pointed out the 8.22% COLA, which is great, but it does come at a cost. So we were told last year that we would be receiving the discretionary block grant, which is referred to as the Arts, Music, and Instructional Materials Discretionary Block Grant. You might hear me just say discretionary block grant because that's a mouthful. We were, at the time, told that that dollar amount would be $2.477 million. Well, in the governor's, but now there are districts that could have spent all of that money this year. We did not. We did spend, on this one, we didn't spend a whole lot of it yet because we were spending down other one-time funds. But the governor is proposing to reduce that by 50%. So in this year's budget, we said we were going to receive $2.477 million that would then carry over to be expended next year and the following year, where now we have to cut that in half. So in other words, $1.238 million goes away if the May revision holds. Now, the Senate and the legislature, they're pushing to not reduce that. But what could happen is they could turn around and say, okay, we won't reduce discretionary block, but we will reduce the COLA. So then it becomes a 6 of one, half a dozen of another situation with reduction. So at this point in time, we're going off of the May revision. So the budget built is based on an 8.22% COLA and a $1.238 million reduction in the discretionary block grant, okay? Now, if you go down to slide 22, another set of one-time funds is the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, another mouthful, the LREBG. I have coined the phrase Lerberger. That's not an official term, but we're using that in the business office and ed services to know what we're talking about when it comes to our Lerberger funds. So that was awarded in the amount of $3.79 million, but in the governor's proposal will be reduced by 32%, which means...
Hang on.
Yes.
Is that a retroactive reduction?
Correct.
Okay, so on the
Go ahead. I'm sure you
on the art,
are
music,
going to express some of the same
and
concerns I have. So yes.
instructional materials discretionary block grant,
Chopped in half.
3.5, but you had 2 years to spend it, right?
Discretionary block was 3 years.
Oh, we actually had till 26, 27 on that one, actually.
Yeah. But you could have spent it all in the first year.
Yeah. Okay, because on here it says 26.
Yeah.
Spent by
Okay, yeah, 20,
All of 26.
all of 26.
Oh, is it June?
June of
June of 20.
2026.
Oh, 25, 26, okay.
Well, when they reduce it like this, it won't be hard to spend it by then.
But
So,
that would be 3 years.
Yeah.
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 So if you had went crazy, wild and crazy the first year, now they don't fund it all the first year, do they? They don't actually send you the money because like there's that whole delay on like we're going to give you this money, but not yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a budget and cash issue, right? I mean, it's the budget line was there. Now, the timing of the cash is always up in the air. But yeah, you feasibly could have spent all the budget this year if you wanted to.
But they didn't actually give you the budget, the full budget, did they?
For discretionary, I'd
How
have to
are they
get
gonna
back to you.
reduce it if they already gave it to you? That is my, like, are they clawing it back? Do we have to pay it back? Are they just reducing our LCFF by that
So
amount?
if
Like,
this holds,
I'm irritated.
well, I am with you on your irritation. What I anticipate happening, what the state typically would do is, let's say we did spend all of the 2.477 million of discretionary block this year, which we didn't, but let's say we did. Then what would happen next year, most likely, is they would look at our local control funding formula allotment and they would reduce it by 1.238 million.
Like I just said, they would just,
Yeah, we wouldn't pay them. They would just not give us all of our LCFF money next year to say, well, you didn't actually get that much in discretionary.
so I have a problem with that because LCFF money is guaranteed money. I mean, that's money that you use to pay for teachers and instructional services, right? So to reduce that by a discretionary grant, which is one-time money that they already said they were gonna give you,
I absolutely,
can really leave a school district in a bind.
well, and the
They
timing.
haven't done anything wrong.
So the timing is the really, difficult part with this. Sorry, I had other adjectives in my head that I decided not to say. So it was the difficult part of this as well, Julia, was this comes at May revision.
Right.
Now, original LCFF Budget 101 was, so let me rewind. When Governor Brown started LCFF in 13-14, it was very common that towards the end of the year, he would say, we ended up with a little bit more money, here's some one-time funds. He wouldn't put it into the LCFF formula, and any CBO worth any money would say, don't spend one-time money on salaries. And the term would be that you hear in the CBO world, don't spend one-time funds on things that eat, right? So if one-time funds came in, it'd be great to, okay, we're gonna buy a bunch of Chromebooks, or we're gonna do a textbook adoption, or we're gonna do things like that where we can spend the money one time, but we're not obligating ourselves. These one-time grants were focused on people, hiring people to accomplish things that a lot of it was post-pandemic recovery, which again sounds good, but from day one, it made me very nervous because I learned from the get-go, don't spend one-time money on people. Not that spending money on people isn't important, but we want to spend the ongoing money on people because people are an ongoing expense, right? So the timing of this is terrible because it came in May and we have people attached to these grants that if we were going to no longer need their services, we would have had to notify them in March. So it's created a major problem. So here's the problem in our budget. We had people built into these two grants that now we're going to have to pay for out of LCFF. So when it becomes 6 of one and half a dozen of another, it's not a true 8.22% COLA because we're having to use a large portion of that COLA to pay for the people that we thought we were going to pay for out of these one-time funds that have now been reduced. Does that make sense?
It does.
It makes perfect sense
Yeah.
to all of us, not the people that are arbitrarily making these rules. But
We had
great.
some really colorful conversations at about 9 p.m. last week in the business office about all this. So, yeah, it's frustrating to say the least. So anyway, so those are the two biggies where, I mean, there's a lot of detail we can get into in a budget, but to me, it boils down to three numbers, right? An 8.22% COLA, which is nice. That totals about $3 million in increases for our district. But then they reduced one-time funds by 2.5 million. So essentially the reduction in one-time funds ate up the COLA. So here's the problem. In this jockeying with the Senate and the legislature, with the governor, because they all got to sign off on this budget by the first week of July, or then we have a bunch of other problems, which I don't want to get into tonight. They could say, okay, we won't reduce the one-time funds, but then they might reduce the COLA. So going back to what I said earlier, there's a couple ways to look at this. If this is the worst case scenario, because there's a reality here where state revenues are not where they thought they'd be. We can't fix that, okay? I would much rather they reduce the one-time funds and keep the COLA high than the other way around. Because then next year, if we don't have the one-time funds, we can reduce staff and adjust accordingly. People may not love it, but there's a reality to that where we may have to reduce staff and adjust accordingly. Now, are we going to lay a bunch of people off? Probably not. We're going to have to tell people this job no longer exists, but guess what? We have openings in 5 other jobs that do exist. You want to move over to that job, right? I mean, we're not going to be sending a bunch of people packing like they don't have a job. We need employees, right? But we may have to use them in other areas. But year over year, that 8.22% COLA will stick with us in our LCFF funding, which is a good thing, right? So again, if I'm optimistic, that's the way I'm looking at it. Now, on the flip side, it's frustrating because last year they shouted from the rooftops how great these one-time funds were. And then this year they're talking about the big COLA and kind of trying to like not highlight the fact that they cut those monies down significantly that were celebrated last year.
We actually need some legislation because they shouldn't be able to claw back
Yeah, I mean,
the apportionments that have already been,
I learned that, and I think first or second grade, I think we called it no take backsies, right?
Yeah.
I agree.
Good times. And as you would say, I have a lot of editorial comments that I'll keep to myself. But I did have a question. The last time, maybe it was not the last time, but either way, very recently we talked about having to essentially take out a loan because of cash flow and those kind of things. Does this affect any of that in some way? Or
Absolutely. Yeah.
is this why we're doing this? Or is this in addition
No, it's not
to?
why. It still goes back to the property taxes and how such a large portion of our LCFF funding comes from local property taxes. So we really only see the cash flow twice a year in December and April, right? That still is the main problem with that. Because then the state funds only make up 13, 14 million of our overall 40 some odd million of LCFF funds coming our way. So it's still more of a local property tax and the way education's funded issue than it is for this. But that's also an issue too. So
I mean, even if you didn't hire people, but say you invested in a program that has a yearly fee for your district, now you're scrambling to pay that yearly fee for, learning recovery, for example. I mean, I know that we approved some programs to assist with that, in
We absolutely
particular with
did.
ELA in elementary schools, I remember.
and people, there's a lot of people built in it. And I don't want to downplay this or talk like, oh yeah, we're going to end up laying a bunch of people off. These were great ideas to help pull us out of the pandemic and the negative impacts it had on students. I mean, we're talking extra counselors, extra intervention teachers, intervention aides. I mean, there's a lot of great positions that came about because of these one-time funds. And yeah, we figured out a way to balance the budget for next year. But if things don't get right, then those types of positions will have to go away a year or two earlier than what we previously had planned. And that's going to hurt students in the end.
I mean, and if you're looking at this, all of these positions, the services to close learning gaps, they're all people. All instruction is a person that is doing it.
Correct.
All of this, decreasing or stabilizing staff to people ratios, that's all people. So I don't understand how they can give one-time money to all of these services require people. So what, are they just thinking that these people that are hired now don't want a job in 3 years, or we don't need to destabilize whatever this is?
And again, this is where it's tough for me, because it's like part of me just looks at this like, I mean, I've dealt with situations where we had to make cuts, right? And you got to make really hard decisions. So in their defense, personal income tax came in really low And I've said this before, California is heavily reliant on the top 1% of earners. So personal income tax, affectionately known as the PIT, right, is so much of that money, well, I think it's over half of it, comes from the top 1% of earners. And so it makes it really volatile. So California historically, when times are good nationwide, California on average tends to do better than the nationwide average. But conversely, when times start to get tough, California tends to do worse than the nationwide average. We're more of a roller coaster than the national average is when it comes to the good times and the bad times financially. So, back to my point. If you got to make tough decisions, like I said, I would rather see this money go to ongoing funds and cut the one time. I'm glad that Sean and I and Tori and Jenny, as we worked through this, didn't go crazy and spend down these monies super quickly, or we would be having an entirely different conversation right now, because we would have said, I'd be saying, we actually already spent some of this money that is being reduced. That would be a bigger problem. We're not talking about that. But it is affecting next year's budget and definitely affecting the following year's budget if we don't have these one-time funds. Okay? All right, moving on. I could keep going. Okay, slides 28 and 29. This is just a reminder and some good news as well. In slide 28, this is just a reminder of how we're rolling toward universal transitional kindergarten, which will take effect fully in 2025-26. So this is creating a couple more months of eligibility of 4-year-olds each year over the next 3 years until all 4-year-olds on September 1st will be eligible for transitional kindergarten, okay? Now, one good thing in this proposal that's a change is the staffing ratio. So originally when this was proposed, it was the staffing ratio would be 10-to-1, but you could have 24 students. And I mean, I was in a couple of meetings with CBOs about math and how if you divide 24 by 10, you get 2.4 adults.
It would have to be multiples of 10. You'd have to have like 30 or 20. And 20 is too, I mean,
Yeah, okay.
crying out loud.
So in this proposal, yes, in this proposal, what they're saying now is instead of a 10-to-1 average, it's a 12-to-1 average, which matches the 24 class size. So now what that looks like in Amador County Unified is we can have a TK class of up to 24 kids, and we could have one teacher and one aide, right? Instead of, if it was 10-to-1 and we had 24 kids, we'd have to have one teacher and 2 aides, or 2 teachers and 1 aide, right? So this is better, this is good news. We figured out that 24 divided by 12 works better than 24 divided by 10.
Right, but does that actually work for 24 4-year-olds to only have 2 adults in the room?
It does, yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it does. We have some great TK teachers that
Did you
manage
say
it.
they're not all 4-year-olds?
It depends on the
It
4-year-olds.
depends on the 4-year-old. It's kind of like herding cats, honestly.
Yeah, it is.
But
I mean, we have some great TK teachers that do a lot, and those aides, they are working. I mean, those kindergarten and TK aides are. You want to like send a TK teacher over the edge. Tell them their aide's absent for the day, right? Like they're going to be like, how am I going to get through the day, right? They need. I mean, it's such a partnership, and there's some really great partnerships with our classified and certificated staff. But the kindergarten and TK partnerships we have with those staff members is really good. And so this does set us up well. We do not have very many TK classes that push all the way to 24, though. I mean, our class sizes in TKs hover more around 17 to 20. Our staffs can then adjust accordingly, and if you're going to go a little bit bigger, closer to 24, you're going to see that in a kindergarten class, not in a TK class. And again, as you roll out every 2 months, we're getting younger 4-year-olds, right? Because they're younger and younger over the next 3 years.
How come we don't call it preschool or pre-K?
Because they also reduce the age for preschool for all 3-year-olds.
So preschool is considered 3-year-olds, TK is 4-year-olds.
The governor has a term that he calls cradle to career. I mean, he's not at the hospital delivering the babies yet, but we're getting closer. So, okay. So, long and the short of it, we do have a balanced budget, but I have to be honest with you, it's tenuous. I mean, based on the information we have today, we have an overall budget. Let me pull that number for you so I can say it accurately. My computer is not cooperating. We are projecting an overall budget bringing in $60.4 million worth of revenue and expending $62.3 million. Now, that's on the surface level, looks like an upside down budget, but remember, with one-time monies, we can only report the revenue one time. And so many of those expenditures are revenues that were reported this year or prior year. When we look at unrestricted funds, it puts us in a position where we will be right side up by unrestricted funds by just a couple $100,000. So on a $60+ million budget, to be right side up by a couple $100,000 is the equivalent of, in someone's personal finances, to have their yearly budget right side up by probably about $10. So it's a tight budget. And this constraining of one-time funds is definitely a big part of that.
Jared, I have a question on the one-time funds, and I'm just going to use ballpark figures. Like one-time funds last year, they said, and we accounted for them this year, of $3 million.
Yes.
Next year, they're cutting it by $1.5 million. Do we get credit for not getting the whole $3 million?
No, what'll happen is when we bring unaudited actuals to you in October, we will amend everything that happened in adopted budget, first interim, second interim, and say, well, actually, none of those numbers were right. This is what the actual revenue was when we closed the books. So it'll be reflected in unaudited actuals.
And so when it comes down to our reserve, I know the reserve number could change because we're obviously spending less things. Is that kind of
Well, that's more revenue-based. Remember, reserves are based on expenditures.
Yeah.
So our expenditures haven't fluctuated like the revenue did in these two areas. So it will show the revenue going down, but the expenditures are already there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So again, next week, I will have my typical slideshow that I bring to you summarizing our exact revenues and expenditures and walking you through those steps. I thought, since we have 2 board meetings to discuss the budget, I thought it would be best tonight to kind of give you more of the overview of just the state budget and the impact on our budget and having all those documents there, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the finer details of our budget next week. And there's no action needed on this item.
Just really quickly, sorry, one more question.
Oh, no problem.
Can they, whoever they are, take away more of this one-time funding? Is that like?
Absolutely.
I know, but I'm just sitting here like, oh hey, 2 years ago you could have $3 million. Oh, just kidding. Now you can't have $0 and you have to pay us back.
Yes, they
Like-
could. They could. This is where, so the budget will be enacted the first week of July. School Services, which provides, in my opinion, the best service for CBOs on unpacking the state budget, they will do another conference called their School Finance and Management Conference. I believe it's on July 17th. And we will then dig in to what actually was enacted. Because again, going back to the beginning of my presentation, all of this is based on a proposal, not an enacted budget. But that's what we're required to do. And so once the budget is enacted in July, then we can really start moving forward. It's pretty rare, Kayla, for them to make a mid-year adjustment like this, but they absolutely can. They've done it before.
You know, this is sleight of hand. This is saying we're not actually going to give you your full LCFF. This is what this is.
You can definitely make a strong argument for that, Julia. So anyways, I won't have any, there won't be an update between today and next week on this, right? Today was just focused on state. Next week, it'll be, okay, so here's what our budget actually looks like for your approval. Because again, we're reading the headlines, we're looking at the updates, but it's posturing and conjecturing and negotiating that's going on right now politically. And then when the budget bill actually gets signed, at this point, that's all that matters to me. From now until the budget bill is signed, no headlines truly matter because we're doing this off of May revision. That's the best information we have. And sometimes it changes for the better by the time the budget is acted, and sometimes it changes for the worse. This current fiscal year we're wrapping up, from May revised to enacted budget, money actually improved. So it was a good thing, but it can go the other way around. That's it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Critchfield.
You're welcome.
12.5, Raptor Technologies Purchase and Subscription Services Agreement, Mrs. DeWalt and Mr. Critchfield.
Yeah, I'm gonna have Jenny get started with this. We're gonna tag team this presentation tonight.
Okay.
Hello. I think it's kind of ironic that earlier today when Mr. Snyder was talking about the LCAP, school safety came up quite a bit. So this kind of falls under, we're well aware of how important it is to be safe at school for students and staff. So this Raptors technology is a component that we're asking to be able to purchase that helps us fill a gap that we have on all of our campuses. Right now we have a system that we're putting in place to clear volunteers, to clear coaches, to follow law, to make sure everybody who's around our kids is safe to be around our kids. But there is a struggle on how, once adults go to campus, on how to make sure they're either cleared or if they're a visitor that they should be there. And so this gives us an opportunity to do that. And so what it is every adult who comes on campus would check in. If they're a cleared volunteer, their volunteer badge, the goal is that those badges will have a barcode that then they could just go to the scanner and scan in their badge, and it notes that they're on campus. If they're a visitor, they would have to have a photo government issued ID, and they would swipe their ID in a machine, and then that platform will actually check every sex registry in the country. And then if that person flags on one of those sex registry, the staff member helping check in visitors would see that pop up and then could deny that visitor access to campus. If they, if nothing flags for them, then the staff member can approve that visitor on campus, and they get a badge that the machine prints out for them. It's kind of like when you visit the hospital and you get a little day pass to visit. That's what this visitor badge would look like. The other big component of this is when we've looked at if there's ever an emergency on a campus, we are responsible for knowing who's there and then who to give first responders information about. These are all the adults on campus, this is where they should be, and we don't really have a way to do that right now. And so this would keep track of all the adults who are on campus. So if we ever had a fire, heaven forbid, some kind of mass event, it would be in one place, an opportunity for us to share it with first responders who we need to make sure are safe in that situation. There is kind of an upfront cost that you'll see, and then a much smaller annual renewal cost. A lot of the upfront cost has to do with the actual physical equipment and training for staff, and then the ongoing cost is just the use of everything.
And Jenny and her team have done a great job of getting us in the right spot when it comes to volunteers, but we don't have a system that's dedicated to managing all the volunteers. And Jenny, how many volunteers did we have this year total?
A couple thousand.
I mean, more than we have employees. We have more volunteers than we do employees. And so to manage all those people in one place on one set of software, and we can track things like have their fingerprints cleared. Do we have all their information? When the employee comes in, they can log into Raptor, create their account, and apply to be a volunteer instead of filling out a piece of paper by hand that then Jenny's staff has to hand enter into a spreadsheet that they're trying to maintain to keep track of all these people. So accuracy will go up, tracking everybody will be more accurate. I mean, it just, Raptor's been around for a long time. I've met with them at multiple conferences and talked to districts that use them. They have a really good system. They have other offerings as well that we'll explore. We thought the volunteer and visitor management were two of our biggest needs. And so that's what we identified out of the gate. And like Jenny said, you know, the total cost of this contract is a little over $40,000, but the ongoing expense is $16,000. So it's a relatively low ongoing expense for what this addresses, and we feel like it's appropriate to be able to manage this as well. I've also said to many people who have asked about this, I think our schools overall do a really good job of having systems in place for accounting for students on campus when something bad happens. We practice fire drills and lockdown drills and all those things. We can I remember when I was at Amador, we got our fire drills down to like 3 minutes. I mean, we could have everybody out of every classroom and accounted for inside of 3 minutes. But we never had a system in place for, do we have every adult? Did they all clear the classrooms? Did they all get out? Like how many volunteers are on campus right now? How many visitors are on campus? Like we've never done a great job of accounting for that. And law enforcement and our fire departments have said, you have to do better at knowing who every single person, not just child, every single person who is on your campus at any moment in time. And this system does a great job of accounting for all the adults on campus.
Just a really quick question about this. You said that when they are scanning like their IDs and stuff, if somebody this is just for visitors, is that right? Is that how?
No, there's two different scanners.
Okay.
So there's a barcode scanner. So at the front desk, there'll be 3 pieces of equipment. Mm-hmm. There's a barcode scanner. So for volunteers and employees, they can just scan their ID badge and they're in.
Okay.
Okay. Then there's a second scanner that they actually refer to as a toaster scanner. It's a small little scanner, and you put the ID in like you're putting a piece of bread in the toaster, which is why they call it that. And so you put their state-issued ID, driver's license or whatever, in. It scans that ID and then checks the sex offender registries. That's for visitors. We're not going to have our employees every day bring their driver's license out and put it in. And then the third piece of equipment is a small printer that has a reel with sticky badges on it. And so then for the visitor, not for the volunteer or the employee, for the visitor, it'll print the badge that then says the location they're allowed to be on campus, their name, date, and all of that. And that works as their visitor pass to be on campus. Volunteers and employees won't have a badge printed because they have their own badge already created. Does that make sense?
Now, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. But my second question, I guess, is if you don't have a state-issued ID, you cannot come on campus. Is that correct?
As a visitor?
As a visitor.
No.
Okay.
We can deny you.
Good.
Absolutely.
And secondly, as for employees and people who are volunteers with their own badges, are those, if perhaps a volunteer or somebody was not on the sex offender list when they became a volunteer and then manages to get themselves on the list, does that pop up, or how does that?
Yeah.
Does that? That'll.
They all
automatically.
volunteers. That's why they have to get their fingerprints taken.
Okay.
And then once they're arrested, then it pops.
It popped. Okay.
That system works very well. You can tell after a 3-day holiday weekend, we always get like DUIs pop and
Okay.
other things.
Okay, that was
And
my question.
So to be clear, the visitor scanning just does an internet search sex offender registries. Volunteers and employees are fingerprinted. That's a full DOJ clearance. So a DUI, a domestic incident, whatever, that will pop up and we get notified. So anytime we put a volunteer in or an employee in, we pay DOJ $32. And out of the gate, it's like, whoa, that's a lot. But that keeps their fingerprints in the system, and it's the mechanism for then they notify us if something goes wrong with that person. Yeah.
The other really helpful part about Raptor, if you've in the last year signed up to be a coach in our district, you're probably getting more familiar with home campus, and everything is done in the system. There's not a bunch of paperwork you fill out with pen and paper. Raptor has the same possibility to where our volunteer packet will sit in the system and people go online and fill it out in the system. So we're not also dealing with stacks and stacks and stacks of paper everywhere. It's all in one place.
And
Will it
I want to,
expedite that process as well?
it will help expedite the process because now you don't have a staff member that has to process physical paperwork and then get it in. And the other thing we're doing to expedite the process is we purchased a fingerprinting machine.
Right.
And so that is, we're about to go live on that. We have employees trained in that. And so now instead of when a volunteer or a new employee comes in and we send them to law enforcement to get their fingerprints. Now it's going to be walked down the hall to the superintendent's office, and then one of our administrative assistants will do their fingerprints right then and there.
So it's gonna be a faster process
Yes.
all around.
It's still a little painful because of all the requirements we have to follow, but Jenny's done a great job of getting the process to be as fast as it can be given the circumstances, and this will help.
The other nice part with online system of storing all of that, if you volunteer year after year, you just have to go online and update like one piece of paper and then keep your TB updated every 4 years. You don't have to go track it down. You don't have to wonder.
You don't have to be
It's-
re-fingerprinted,
Right.
all those things, yeah.
So I see an issue, or not necessarily an issue, that everybody has to check in, which we want to happen, but it's also going to add that people have to check out. So a lot of times they'll get done and they'll just get in the car, so we don't know where
So
they're
what,
at.
so what we're gonna ask, Jenny and I both brought this up, having been principals, we're like, okay, how's that gonna work? You can, at the end of the day, clear the system of everybody on campus. So at this point in time, our tentative idea would be, if you're staying as an adult beyond the final bell of the school day, we're not gonna make everybody check out at the end of their day. The secretary can just clear the system at the end of the day. But if you're an itinerant staff member, like let's say you're a maintenance worker and you're there to fix a pipe and you're there for 2 hours, you're gonna check in and then you're gonna check out so that if an emergency happens 3 hours after your arrival, we know that you left campus, so we don't have to worry about you. And so that's just kind of what we're gonna work with the principals and with
that's gonna be
labor and
with-
all that on this.
With staff also, you know, that,
Yeah.
because a lot of times staff likes to go right to their classroom, and if I don't make it up to the office today, well, it's, you know,
They're gonna need to swing by the office so we can account for them
Yeah.
being on campus.
yeah, which they should.
But that's with the barcode scanner, right? It's quick.
But checking out would be an issue?
Well, checking out at a school, your checkout
Staff
time,
doesn't check in and out right now, punch the clock, so to speak?
no, we
right
don't
now?
do time cards like that.
No?
No, we don't.
Is that a union thing?
I guess it could be, but I mean, I ran the biggest school in the district and I knew if someone was late or not. I mean, you know when people don't show up on time. You're dependent on all of them.
No,
So it's pretty easy to keep track of that. It's really the end of the day, especially with teachers, because, you know, their workday technically only goes about 20 minutes beyond the final bell. And at elementaries, they have their prep period and then, you know, beyond that. But, I mean, you could have a teacher stay till 5 or 6 p.m. grading papers, doing things like that. And so the variance on when people actually leave is pretty wide. Our focus is more when there are students on campus. We also want to make sure we account for all the adults versus when there aren't students on campus. It's just not as relevant.
Well, also at 5 o'clock at night, it's pretty easy to tell who still has cars in the parking lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Where 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's really hard to tell sometimes.
Correct.
So how does that work if an admin clears everyone and you have someone that's still there? Are they cleared or do they have to go back and recheck in?
At the end of the day, if the system gets cleared, then you can leave whenever you want to go home.
But is there any, something happens after someone's been cleared and they think they're gone, but then someone's still there? Is there?
To be honest, there's like a lot of variables to this. I had a staff member one time who was working on the weekend and was hurt And it required a 911 call and some other things. And so I think there's a lot of variables that once it's implemented, it's one of those things, a little bit you have to live it to figure out what's the best way at the end of the day and when's the best time to clear it so everybody can move on.
This is kind of a, I guess, general question. How does a system like this, how does that come under consideration by the district? Does the district put out, we're looking for a system, or does just someone research one, find it, and say, hey, let's go with this one?
I think there are systems that are more widely used. I know when we started looking into this one, we were able to get references with other districts who use it. So if you're familiar with that district, that was helpful. This system, Mr. Critchfield talked about other components or other platforms this system has the availability to do. And it talks with Aries, so it can tag team with the system we already use in the future if we need it to. Those are all considerations.
Finally, this quote says it expires on 5/26. Is there a new quote coming, or did they say that?
Yeah, she forgot to update that date on the quote, so these prices will hold.
Thank you.
Did anybody else have questions? The ongoing annual cost is it looks like it's gonna be about 16,000, not counting if we have to buy more labels.
Yeah.
And that'll be budgeted for and all that.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
That's based on all school sites.
Yeah, that's with this system functioning at all schools.
School sites. So that's not necessarily counting something like transportation or the district office.
Correct.
Okay. And what happens when we consolidate and we close campuses like Ione Elementary? When it gets moved to the junior high, is that going to be reflective back?
So yeah, we would have a savings on one fewer site, or we talked about taking that equipment and then moving it to the district office, and so then the district office has a check-in point as well. So I mean or for a larger site, you give them 2 sets of equipment because they have multiple secretaries. So then the check-in could happen with more than one employee. So
Okay.
you have that option as well.
So it's kind of like the
Yeah.
security cameras when
Oh, yeah.
you have to replace that one before
Yeah.
the warranty,
Right.
your other warranty
Right.
gets renewed.
And there's a lot more equipment you can buy with this. They make self-serve kiosks that are little touch screens, but those were really expensive. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do with this.
Well, self-serve kiosk doesn't work real well if you have somebody with a sex offender coming up.
Right.
You know,
Well, that's
you
more
still-
like
For the,
there are some places where they'll put them in every building, so the employee gets in the building with a key, and then they sign in there, so we know they're there,
Yeah.
but that's just not cost-effective for us.
you said it ties in with Aries. Is there a possibility that, okay, you get there, you log in with Aries?
It ties in with Aries for student information
Oh,
of
okay.
employee.
Oh,
You
so
can
this is
actually, you
Joe's
can actually
father.
use the visitor management system to be your tardy pass system as well. So when a kid shows up late, you can check them in through visitor management and print out their tardy pass. And so then that takes them to class. There are other systems beyond volunteer and visitor management. They have an emergency management system and some other things that tie in closely with Aries as well that we'll analyze if we want to do those moving forward. But like I said, at this time, these were the 2 most important.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, do we know of any other districts that use this?
Yes.
Did you say yes?
Yes.
Okay. What districts are those?
I'd have to look up the list offhand. Do you remember?
I don't remember, but I happened to see an article this week with San Joaquin County, and their grand jury looked at all their schools, and being able to monitor which adults are on campus was one of the things their grand jury looked at the most and has the most work for the district to do. And this happened to be one of the programs they mentioned as what they're looking into to solve their grand jury findings.
This item needs approval, correct?
It does.
I motion that we approve item 12.5, the Rapper Technologies Purchase and Subscription Services Agreement.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker and Mr. Crow. Roll call vote, Mr. Crow,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Marzano,
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker.
Yes.
I'm also a yes.
Thank you.
Okay, 12.6, Declaration of Need for Fully Qualified Educators, Mrs. DeWalt.
When we get to the county board meeting, you'll see a companion item to this. This is an annual requirement for the board to approve, so that way the district office can request teaching permits for teachers. It's one of the key things we need to do to help support staffing moving forward.
Are there any questions on this item? Okay, then we need a motion to approve.
Yes, please.
Okay,
I'll move to approve item 12.6, Declaration of Need for Fully Qualified Educators 2023 through 2024.
I'll second.
thank you, Mr. Crow and Ms. Parker. Roll call vote, Mr. Crow,
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Marzano,
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker,
Yes.
and I'm also a yes. Okay, item 12.7, MOU for employee fuel cards, still Mrs. DeWalt.
This MOU was agreed with CSEA 239. It's meant to be kind of a proactive way to support employees and make sure that when they're using their fuel cards, it's attached to them and not a vehicle. So it's a little bit of a protection. So if anything comes up with a fuel card, it's very easy to track who made a mistake and who did not. So we are requesting that the board approve this MOU. It puts in place a protocol for issuing fuel cards, for which employees get fuel cards, and how those fuel cards are managed by the employee in the district.
I have a question. Was there any determination if there was a difference in costs as far as having a card attached to a vehicle versus having everyone having a card?
I think the same amount of money is spent kind of either way in terms of how much fuel we're buying, and so I don't think there's an additional cost having a card for every person.
Okay, I was just thinking that with that many cards, kind of my second comment would be an increase in cards increases the likelihood of cards being lost, increase the chances of I don't know if they call it phishing or whatever, where the numbers could be stolen while they're out being used. I'm just wondering if that, in my mind, that would be a concern as far as how many.
Yeah, I agree there's more
additional
cards, so there's a potential for that, but right now, with the card being attached to a vehicle, I think it's more tenuous because a lot of times it just sits in the glove box, the fuel card of the vehicle, and that isn't the safest route either. And again, this also puts the onus on the employee to report if their card goes missing and anything like that, and we audit this information very frequently to keep up on any charges that may look out of the norm and don't follow our protocols and procedures.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's no additional questions or concerns. We need a motion to approve this MOU.
Make a motion that we approve item 12.7, the MOU employee fuel cards.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Roll call vote. Mr. Crow?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Marzano?
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
I'm also a yes. 5-0. 12.8, another MOU, collaboration and professional development. Mrs. DeWalt.
So this MOU is an opportunity for staff to be able to have built-in time in their day to collaborate. The knowledge and skills of educators are maintained and improved through the exchange of ideas and professional dialogue. Increasing educational aspiration and student achievement through skilled teaching and strong leadership can be obtained through scheduled collaboration. In an effort to retain skilled professional educators, whereby staff morale, satisfaction, and confidence are attained, the monitoring and implementation of collaboration time in the workday will commence in the 23-24 work year. What we are asking is for the board to approve this MOU. Previously, an MOU was approved for, we have tentative MOU, or we have agreed MOUs with CSE 239 and both of our county bargaining units. So this gives an opportunity for all staff to have a early release day, 1 day a week when there's a full week, so not on weeks where there's holidays, for collaboration time, for some professional development, for opportunities to just do the work that needs to be done. This is a very common practice in many districts, and it's something we've worked a really long time on as a system to get in place. So we do ask that you approve this MOU.
Does anybody have any questions?
I just wanted to ask and clarify, other school districts do this, correct?
Yes.
Okay. It's a very common practice, right?
She's not here today, but I've heard Tori Gibson, our superintendent, comment that she's been in education about 25 years, and we're the first school district she's ever worked in that didn't already have this in place.
Have also worked in other school districts where this is very common, so.
I have a question about the collaboration calendar. It's got colors on there, and some of the colors are extremely difficult to see. You know,
Yeah.
Can you explain? Basically, are we looking at Mondays and Thursdays as A days, and Tuesdays and Fridays as B days on the weeks that we have collaboration?
Yeah, I was part of that conversation about the calendar just because I have secondary experience. And I don't know in the transition, the conversion, I think it might have been because it was a scan with signatures on it. Those colors don't show well. The electronic version of this, Jim, is much easier to read. I just think the scanning, those colors did not come through well. So yeah, in a typical week, that's 5 days. You're going to have your collaboration day on Wednesday. Your A days will be Monday and Thursday, and your B days will be Tuesday and Friday. And then that collaboration day will be an 8-period day, all 8 periods.
Okay. I would hope that when it does go out to the public, that the calendars show great color on there so it's easy to see.
It will electronically. Like I said, we have hand signatures on the side there, and that forced this document to be a scan, but we won't have hand signatures on the document that goes out to the public.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so on the MOU, collaboration shall occur on Wednesdays when school is in session, but not on weeks when there is a Monday holiday.
I think it's just saying that, like, we won't do collaboration time outside of the school year. It's on weeks when school is in session. And then if there's a Monday holiday, then we won't have collaboration time because then it still allows for 2 A days and 2 B days during that week, which was really important for secondary teachers for an equal number of A and B days.
Okay, so there's some Wednesdays where the kids don't get out early?
Correct.
I think there's like 3 of them.
President's Day, Martin Luther King Day, Martin Luther King Jr., Labor Day.
And
Labor Day.
Veterans Day.
I'm
Well,
looking
Veterans
at the
Day
calendar.
is a Wednesday
Veterans Day
holiday.
is on a Saturday, which means that Friday would be the holiday because if it's on Veterans Day, if it comes on Saturday, you celebrate it Friday, and if it's on Sunday, you celebrate it on Monday. So I see a collaboration day there in November.
Yeah, it was specific to Monday holidays, so that's a Friday holiday. So for whatever reason, the secondary teachers, we're okay with that. It wouldn't seem
Doesn't make any sense.
no, because it's still a one. It would throw off the balance of A days and B
No,
days.
it doesn't
but-
throw off the balance.
Oh.
We really focused on the Monday holidays, but by the time you get to Veterans Day, you
Okay.
end up in weeks that are already a little bit wonky because then you have Thanksgiving, you have Christmas coming up. So we looked at November and December in great detail, I promise. Okay. With one math teacher in particular who's like our expert in A's and B days in the district, and she looked at this with a fine-tooth comb. So it still balances the A's and the B's over the course of a semester.
So my concern is less with the balance of A's and B's, although that is very important. My concern is I've already heard from parents who are struggling with the schedule diversion, I guess, and having smaller kids, having to arrange childcare. And, typically when you pay for that, you have to be pretty regular. So I'll be curious to know once parents are actually aware that there's 3 or 4 days where, they don't need childcare, if they end up paying for those or not, because, sometimes you pay for time you don't use because of that. Like I know ELP is sometimes like that.
You also have to remember with ELP, it's transitioning into ELP for all, and families that are free and reduced will have ELP for free. So an ELP will be open right away on those collaboration days. So the ELP will start earlier in collaboration.
Will ELP have the capacity to accept extra students just on the early release Wednesdays?
We've talked about it, but at this point, no. We will look at trying to figure out a way to do that. It would take more staff. That would just need more staff on Wednesdays. So,
Right.
we have a couple ideas kicking around that we might be able to provide that, but at this point, we can't.
We collaborated with ACRA regarding these Wednesdays.
Well, we do have an MOU with them that, for our ELOP program, but not specific to this Wednesday, but we have a meeting with them. Actually, I think Michelle's meeting with them tomorrow or next week, so that's another possibility. Okay, next week. Thank you. I knew it was coming up.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
No, I mean, Julia, I've seen the concern expressed online as well. I saw some people concerned about instructional minutes, but the instructional minutes and days that we have in class all stay. There's minimum requirements, so I'm going to assume that this calendar reflects all of those.
Yeah, the bell schedules have not been finalized, but what's going to happen, and this is what happens in the multitude of districts that already do this, is those other 4 days of the week are going to be a little bit longer than what they saw this year. And that allows for us to reduce the time on the Wednesday. So you're still getting in the same minutes.
Yeah, and I guess, sorry, James. I guess I can maybe add like just a little bit of perspective on this, is coming from somebody who has taught class or in the classroom and having that time. I know that some people were very upset and saying that teachers don't need this time and my kid should be being educated during this time. During this time, it's not like an extra, oh, yay, we're off 2 hours early. We get to leave and go home 2 hours early. It's not how it works. It's very important and really necessary to have some of this time to even just on this collaboration time to even just speak to teachers that are teaching the same grade level. We talk about wanting consistency across. Well, this is the way that you get it, is by talking and working with teachers, working with other people that are doing this and kind of really streamlining things that are happening. And right now that's just, and in a very long time, has not happened here. And so if you want consistency across the board, this is a really good way to start getting that.
That's actually what I was going to ask, if somebody with the higher powers explain what would be kind of a basic or standard collaboration day so that we fully understand that it's not Lake Day or happy hour, or
Yeah, and that's important perception, right?
For sure.
So, and what Kayla said is, it's not teachers check out early and head home. There's a good job at the bottom of page 1 defining teacher-led collaboration, and 20 of the days are teacher-led. And so exactly what you said, where maybe all the first grade teachers decide to get together and talk about the unit they taught for social studies, or for, all the whole district, virtually or in person or whatever. That's one example. Maybe teachers need to talk to the special education teacher that has students in their classroom supporting them, and kind of talk about what the needs of those students are. There's no time right now built in for teachers to do that. If they're doing it, they're doing it after hours or on their own time. Not everybody can do that. They have their own commitments, their children to leave, right at after their work shift is over. And so just having that time built in and guaranteed for our staff to do those important things it's gonna be huge. And coming from a teacher herself, that really speaks volumes right there. And then on some of the district-led days, so there's also some days that we will lead, or site-led days. Those might be things where we do some professional development, where we bring someone in to present, or we do our mandated training for English language learners, and those types of things. So we have control over what happens on some of those days. The teachers control some of the other days, but it absolutely is not time where anyone will be leaving early. Everyone's going to be busy. Our paraprofessionals are excited about it, from our classified. I know 827 on the county side already has every day all planned out and exactly what they're going to do, because they never had time to really come together and talk with each other about improving their practice, and growing as professionals. So that's just kind of a nutshell on what will happen on those days.
Sean, another thing that'll work out too is because we put out initiatives like MTSS, it gives the teachers time to work on getting their plan together to implement MTSS, and all the initiatives that are done throughout the district, like Universal Design for Learning, getting that out to the people.
Ironically, we've actually talked about MTSS a lot in relationship to this, because the key pillar of MTSS is collaboration. So we've been asking staff to work on implementing this system, and we never had a built-in time to actually let them do step 1.
All right, if there are no further questions or comments, we need a motion.
I'll move to approve item 12.8, the MOU collaboration and professional development.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Parker and Mr. Whitaker. Roll call vote. Mr. Crow?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Marzano?
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
I'm also a yes. 12.9, and our last discussion action item for tonight is the CSEA 239 Successor Collective Bargaining Agreement. Mrs. DeWalt.
All right, so just a little information. A successor bargaining agreement, about every 3 years, a union contract has an end date. And when you need to renew that contract, you go through typically the entire contract, update any language that needs to be updated through negotiations with the bargaining unit, and then whatever that final language is gets put and replaces old language, and new language comes in, and then you have a successor contract that is generally good for 3 years. This one, you'll notice, is only good until the June of 2024, because the last contract end date was 2021, and so we were way behind getting to a point where we had a successor contract. So in the next year, we will work with CSA 239, and I know Amy and I have already kind of talked about areas where we know we need to work on language, and so a year from now you should see a successor contract that will be good for 3 years. But we are asking that you approve the successor contract for CSEA 239.
Okay, if there are no questions or comments.
Okay, I will move to approve item 12.9 CSEA 239 Successor Collective Bargaining Agreement.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Parker and Mr. Crow. Roll call vote. Mr. Crow?
Yes.
Ms. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Marzano?
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. That concludes our discussion and action items for the evening, and we are moving on to reports and remarks. We don't have any student board members to go first. Mr. Critchfield, did you have a report?
No, I do not have much of a report tonight. Just want to thank all of our staff for finishing the year strong. And while it was a little bit wild and crazy for the Friday night of the last day of school, that was the first time I think we've ever had the ability to see both high school graduations. And so I had a lot of fun driving all of you around in the district van, and we can do it again next year if you want. So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Critchfield. Mr. Crow.
To add to that, I just want to congratulate all the graduates that moved on. When was it? Last week, I guess, 2 weeks ago.
Week and a half ago, yeah.
Week and a half ago. Just good luck to all of you in your future endeavors.
Ms. Parker?
Yeah, I don't have a report, but I did enjoy attending both graduations. I've lived here my whole life, and that was actually the first time I've ever been to Argonaut's graduation. So that was interesting. But I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Thank you. Mr. Marzano?
Yeah, definite congratulations to all the 2023 graduates. I had a couple I didn't have a report. I had a question or a concern or a thought. Thinking it's great that we're having the meals at Argonaut High School during the summertime. My only question or concern or observation of community thoughts, me also being so far up country, and even like Comanche kids, or is Argonaut the only central hub? Are we?
This year, yeah. I mean, part of it's staffing reasons. We also have worked with community partners that will come to Argonaut and pick up meals and take them to other areas of the community, and we're open to that as well. If people want to work with us, they can contact Mike Pingree, and he can coordinate that.
I know Ion Fire is doing one at one of their stations where they can pick up meals.
Yeah, they come down every day
So
and pick it up.
the kids from Comanche at least can get to Ione. That's a little closer.
Yeah, but other than them,
Yeah, I know you're thinking upcountry.
I'm thinking everywhere.
Yeah.
If kids can't, if that's an opportunity for kids to get a meal,
Yeah, I
hate
agree.
saying this, but that might possibly be the only one they get.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I will talk to
It's
Mike.
always been a concern of mine.
I will talk to Mike about seeing what we can do with other locations and
Yeah.
things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's upcountry fire stations and things like that would probably be more than willing to collaborate and pass out meals.
I'll have him reach out to some community partners and see what we can do.
That'd be great. I've seen parents on social media with that being a concern. I'm sure, you know.
Yeah, it's hard in a county this widespread geographically,
Sure.
right, to provide meals in every corner. It's definitely a challenge.
But also, if we have the ability to provide free meals, let's get it to everybody somehow.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah,
That was just how my hamster was spinning in my head.
yeah. I meet with Mr. Pingree every week, so I'll bring it up when I meet with him.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marzano. Mr. Whitaker?
Congratulations to all the graduates. It was really nice going to both high school graduations at the same time. A lot of handshaking. And good luck to all of them.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Mr. Marzano, I wanted to thank you for bringing up that request, actually, because I did observe the same thing, and I would have forgotten to say something, and thank you for that, for thinking about all of our families who are spread far and wide. Congratulations to all of our graduates, to all of our teachers, staff, and employees who are getting a little bit of a break, even if they're still working. And I hope everybody has a very restorative summer, and looking forward to getting back to it in August already. I am still in my head, I'm still thinking about the cup game of our funding. And it is concerning that our lobbyists, which we have them, have not yet written the legislation and gotten a sponsor for the fact that they continue to claw back our funding every year. So even in the good years, they find a way to mess it up. So I think I'll be sending some emails to our local representative for CSBA. Yeah, I am. It's regular for me that I get upset about the money and it magically vanishes when we go to spend it. So, thank you, everybody, and that will be the end of our meeting. Let me pull up I have to read it because I can never remember it. Our next meeting is next week, which is a departure from our normal schedule, Wednesday, June 21st, here at the County Administration Building at 6:30. However, our SELPA meeting will be starting at 5 p.m., then closed session at 5:30, open session at 6:30, and then county meeting to follow. We are adjourned. It is almost 9 o'clock. Do you guys need a break? Do you want to? Okay. 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 We can go. We're calling to order the Amador County Office of Ed board meeting. It is 8:57 or 58 or so. Mr. Critchfield, do we have any deletions or corrections?
We do not.
Okay. And we do not have any presentations or recognitions. There's no one in the room to make public comment. Okay, I thought I skipped it over. Okay. Item 7 is our consent agenda. Are there any questions on our consent agenda? If not, I would love a motion to approve.
I will move to approve item 7, the consent agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Parker.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Roll call vote, Mr. Crow.
Yes.
Ms. Parker,
Yes.
Mr. Marzano,
Aye.
Mr. Whitaker.
Yes.
I'm also a yes. There are no communications. We do have some discussion action items that closely mirror our previous meeting. First one is public hearing. I'm going to open the public hearing on the 2023-24 Local Control Accountability Plan. California statute requires that before a local educational agency considers adoption of the LCAP or an annual update to the LCAP, the LEA shall hold at least one public hearing to solicit the recommendations and comments of members of the public regarding the specific actions and expenditures proposed to be included in the LCAP or annual update to the LCAP. This public hearing provides an opportunity for all stakeholders to provide comments and feedback on the annual update to the 2022-2023 LCAP and the draft 2023-2024 LCAP. Are there any comments for this public hearing? There are none. We're going to declare the public hearing closed and move to item 9.2, which is the first reading of the 2023-2024 Local Control Accountability Plan.
Yes, thank you. So because we are a single district county, we're able to submit a joint combined LCAP to the Department of Education for approval. So what you see here is the exact same document we discussed in the district meeting. We submit a joint county and district LCAP, so there's nothing different from this one at all. Everything applies that we discussed in the district meeting. So happy to answer any other questions or comments at this time.
So just nothing changes as far as special education funding or anything. Special education students don't get any additional funding through the LCAP. It's just the foster youth, the 3 categories that we mentioned earlier.
Correct,
Okay.
yes. Yep.
If there are no other questions or comments, we need a motion to approve. Oh, do we? No, we just need to declare the first reading successful.
Right,
correct?
declare a successful first reading. Same process as the district meeting.
Last call for questions or comments. Okay, I'm going to declare this a successful first reading of the 2023-24 LCAP.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. 9.3, I'm going to open the public hearing for the 2023-24 annual budget. In accordance with California Education Code 42127, the governing board shall hold a public hearing on the budget to be adopted for the subsequent fiscal year. The budget to be adopted shall be prepared in accordance with California Education Code Section 42126. and shall be approved on or before July 1st of each year. This is that hearing. There are no persons present to make comments, so we're going to declare the public hearing closed. And our last discussion action item is 9.4, 2023-24 annual budget presentation. Mr. Critchfield.
Yeah, we won't go back through the state budget situation, but we will have more details next week on the specifics of this budget. All the specifics are in there in those documents. We have nearly $11 million budget on the county side, which is still a pretty hefty budget, but in comparison to the $60+ million district budget, it's quite small. These two budgets go hand in hand. State compliance requires that we submit two budgets, but in many of the ways we operate, this really truly is one big pot of money, and we have to sift through this to have a balanced county budget and a balanced district budget. And so the budget before you is balanced. This is not an action item tonight. It was more for the public hearing and getting the information out there to the public tonight. And next week, I will bring this back for your adoption and approval.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Critchfield. If there are no comments, I'm going to declare this a successful, right?
Yeah.
Is it a first reading also?
No, it's just a discussion item.
Okay. For information only, we do have the personnel recommendations, a job description for Director of School and Community Integration. That's a new position, correct?
Yes. With new funding that comes with it.
Okay.
So.
And then a companion to the declaration of need for fully qualified educators that we saw in the district meeting. Did anybody have any additional remarks or reports, Mr. Critchfield?
I do not.
Board members? Okay.
Congratulations to the 2023 class.
Bears repeating.
Yep.
Our next county meeting will be Wednesday, June 21st at the immediately following the district meeting. We are adjourned. It is not quite 9:05.